He's a good guy.
He's yeah, a nice guy. We've talked to him a couple times. Every time we go there, they're so friendly. You always have conversations with
I
them.
mean, he's looking straight at you, and he might. I think. Well, oh, I met him. No, at Underdogs, and I go
Oh, you
this.
did.
Oh yeah, I told you. I went. Is it called Underdogs?
I
Yeah,
think you're
Underdogs.
right. I think something like that. Underdogs or under something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a sports bar in
Hmm.
Glendale, and it was a pop up. It says Ozzy's a Pizza, and so I went in there and I go, hey, when I ordered the pizza, I go, man, I said, this is like I think he might even had a sign New Haven. I go, this is really New Haven, because it's I haven't had it, but I go, it's very thin. He goes, yeah, I'm from there. I go, wow, that's really cool. So I had eaten there a couple of times, and then they underdogs went under, literally underdogs, and then
And it's the
so
same
that's
owner though. I think though. Start Ozzy's a pizza, right?
no. So underdogs is a different guy, but he had Ozzy's Chris. He had the guy Chris in there just to sell. Like they had other things, but he
Yeah.
was just selling his pizza there. You see, like a pop up,
Oh yeah.
and,
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
and it wasn't every day. It was like Monday through Wednesday, some weird thing like that. And so I watched the Monday night games, and I would order that sometimes, and that's where I met him. And then they moved. I thought so. Once underdogs went down, I go, oh, I guess Ozzy's is gone. But when I saw him on Instagram, I'm like, oh my god, he has a new address. So yeah, it's funny.
Oh man, it's gonna be hard for us to get some pizza from there now. Now that Dave's gone there. So well, we'll go there.
Hello, everybody. In the book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff, they attempt to answer what is going on in our universities. Why are professors being disinvited? Why are teachers and professors, so it's not just the university, but mostly, maybe high schools too, why are they walking on eggshells over what they should or should not say? And I think it addresses something else that's even more important than those two things. And that is why have depression and anxiety gone up, way up among our youth? So I think he does a fine job in his analysis, both of these writers. And I think the first way they attempt to answer those questions as to why is by understanding the concept of anti-fragile. So, any of you familiar with Nassim Taleb's work will know this. It's a really interesting concept. And so, to understand anti-fragile, think of it like this. Imagine a wine glass, it breaks, it's very fragile, right? A wine glass is fragile. Children, on the other hand, are not fragile, they're anti-fragile, which means they improve through stressors. Um, so it's described in the book like this. Just as spending a month in bed leads to muscle atrophy, complex systems are weakened, even killed, when deprived of stressors. Much of our modern structured world has been harming us with top down policies and contraptions, which do precisely this. It's an insult to the anti fragility of systems. This is the tragedy of modernity. As with neurotically overprotective parents, those trying to help are often hurting us the most. So it's reflecting this idea that it often starts with parents before it goes into the schools. An
Right.
overprotection, a coddling, right? There's a really fascinating story about. Oh, by the way, I'll just give you a real quick, great quote by early fourth century philosopher Meng Zhu, where it says, "When heaven is about to confer a great responsibility on any man, it will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinews and bones to hard work, expose his body to hunger, put him to poverty, place obstacles in the paths of his deeds so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he is incompetent." So you're subject to hard times and open to it at least so that you get better. Now, contrast this to a story he tells in the book about a woman named Wendy McElroy, who was invited to debate. not give a lecture to students, to debate. And I'm forgetting where, what university this is. It's a major university. Debate the idea that rape culture is real in America. Now, she was anti that. She doesn't believe that rape culture is prevalent in America like it is in, say, Afghanistan, parts of it anyway, where rape is allowed. Now, students went a little bit out of control over this. They needed safe rooms where they could have coloring books. So, and there's a really interesting quote I'd like to point out. One student who sought out one of these rooms and to avoid the tough, again, it's not even a lecture, though, it's a debate. You're hearing the other side. When she sought out this safe room, she says, I was feeling bombarded by a lot of viewpoints that really go against my dearly and closely held beliefs. Bombarded by viewpoints? So now we're starting to see this shape of a student who has not even been subject to the other side. As a result, you could see the consequence of this. A student who hasn't even been hearing the other side cannot even argue their point anymore or argue their point at all. How? So you'll see a growing, I don't want to use the word ineptness, but perhaps, an incompetence in in the abilities of public speaking, public debate, and all kinds of other problems that come along with it, which we'll talk about. Now, there's one last thing I want to turn over to you, Jake, but there's a real there's a new term that I learned in this book called concept creep. Concept creep. Words evolve. Now, this is a natural thing with language, words evolve, but it's kind of troubling sometimes. So you have a word like trauma. Prior to 1980, it referred to a physical, almost like a physical agent causing physical damage. After 1980, however, it's the concept creep. It changed to include things like mental health disorders being trauma. And now we're talking about words causing trauma. So you see this concept creep. It's very disconcerting. And I just want to point out because there's some solutions that he has, but how about that story of Lenore Skenazy? So now you're going to see a contrast. This woman who had been hearing from her 9-year-old son for a while, take me to something new, take me somewhere different. I want to go on a little trip. So she took him to Bloomingdale's and then, New York City and said, now come back home. I'm going to give you $20, Metro subway card, subway. Yeah, the subway card and the and a map, a map of the tracks, of the rail tracks station. And he should be home by 45 minutes. And guess what? In 45 minutes, this 9-year-old kid figured out. So this created some controversy. She was called America's worst mom by some. But what does that do to the kid? What does that build in him in terms of independence, in terms of intelligence, of learning to socialize,
Yeah.
even with strangers, God forbid? I mean, what a story, huh?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I've had some conversations after reading this book, and not after, during reading as I'm reading this book, and one of them had to do with what you just shared, Ruben, was this. First they talk about the college, what's happening at college, and then they said, "Hey, what about this parenting?" And I have two adult sons. At the same time, they're still living in my home, and I'm still parenting in some sense. But I realized, wait a minute, uh, I've done too much. They talk about helicopter parenting in some sense, and I have to plead guilty in a lot of things that were written. And to the point, I'm going to share real quick, and then I'm going to talk about another piece that I really enjoyed. But my son Orion is going to England spring break, and I'm not kidding you. We've pretty much let him know that we're not too excited about it. Not, it's dangerous. And after reading this, after reading, what the heck am I doing? I need to let this guy. It's a 22-year-old man. let him go out there. And I haven't done that enough as he was growing up. So I've been very convicted, very moved by this book to say, hey, you know what? There are a lot of things I did wrong. Um, Parenting in that sense, and that one woman who's called the most terrible mother that you or parent that you just mentioned because she let her son go on to this subway, and then he figured it out, and that kid will never be the same again because he figured out how to use those subways. And so I
And
know my son.
he
Go ahead.
wanted to go back again.
Yeah, he wanted to do it again. And I said, you know what? After I read that, I told my son, I'm so excited. You know what? That's great. And then now we've been helping. Even Kimberly, we had a great conversation about it. And we're out now. We're like saying, oh yeah, we're giving him idea. And of course, we're parents. We're always gonna be a little nervous, but you know what? This is gonna be great for him. And so that's so good. Ruben, they brought up in the book how things have changed over the decades. When we were kids, we got to play outside. We knew when the light went on or when we heard our mother scream our names, which we did. It was time to come home. Kids today are not playing outside. They are not having and when you play outside, when you play with others, you start learning strategies. You learn about danger because you go, okay, I better not push it too far. But today, a lot of times parents are so afraid they don't let their kids out the door. So what's happening? Number one danger, they're on that technology. And now we're finding out more too, in the book was sharing, average 2 hours, but actually kids are doing it more. And if you're doing 2 hours, you're getting a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and that's being shown. And then for young ladies, as the book shared, it's even they're even getting the more brunt of it, right? You're seeing a lot more in their behavior and then even jealousies and so forth with other girls. And they see it on technology. Oh, she got invited to that party I didn't get to. And I know boys have the same thing, but as a parent, we it's hard to let them go, but it's so healthy. And you know what? I didn't know this. I was sharing with Kimberly before the podcast. I said, Kimberly, it was more dangerous when we were kids than today. There's the murder rate's down, abducting children is down compared to when we were kids. I think they just didn't talk about it as much. And we also didn't have social media back then. But today it's actually a lot more safer to have kids play out in the front lawn, and we don't do it. Do you ever? I hardly ever see kids. Now there are kids who do play out in the front, but very rare. And I think that's just such a that is such a negative for our society, and I think we could turn it around. And I like this book too, Ruben, because it does talk about, hey, here are some problems, but we could turn it around, we could change, and we could reverse it. I was kind of as I'm thinking, as I'm reading this book, I go, are these two guys conservatives, liberal? And at towards the end of the book, they kind of say, hey, not kind of, they say we are. Let's be upfront here. We are two people who've never voted Republican. So they're one's a liberal and the other one's more of a centrist. And I said, and the reason why I said that is because I was thinking, I wonder who would take this, who would read this book and take it as their own and say, hey, this is something I could use and work with. And I don't know. I sometimes feel like there are some people in our society that will just poo-poo on this because it's like, wait, no, 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 no. Feelings mean something because words mean something, and we need to be sensitive to that. Where I think this book is saying, hey, we need to have a little bit more grit in our lives. I'm sorry, you can
Yeah,
say something.
I think that if they haven't read it, they might think that. But what I believe the power in the book
Yeah.
and some of the philosophy behind it is it really examines the psychology of people and that and especially if you read Nassim Taleb. I mean,
Hmm.
if you read nothing, read Anti-Fragile, um, all his books, but because he goes into real, I mean, he goes into depth. I believe in that book, it might have been Skin in the Game, where he talks about the people who are willing to put themselves out there behind their words. So think about the opposite, politicians. I don't want to mention names, but there are a lot of politicians who don't feel the brunt of their decisions. So the politician is the person who doesn't put skin in the game, fragile at times, and then you have those anti-fragile people, or I should say, the concept of anti-fragile gets into depth in that, but I would recommend that. But there's a point going back to Taleb. There's a really nice way to put it. He says that the wind extinguishes a candle, but energizes a fire. And he advises us not to be like candles and not to turn our children into candles. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. So this is kind of like a long-term concept. If you're thinking about who is your child going to be in 5 years, 10 years, And we're a teaching channel, so what are we teaching our students, of course, as well. I think what you just shared was very powerful. You just reflected on your decision with your son, you and Kimberly.
Yeah.
And that is a real powerful thing because not a lot of people are willing to change their mind like that. So I kudos to you that you reflected on yourself because that must be very hard to admit.
It is, but there's a peace afterwards. You're like, oh, that makes sense, And this is something that I could, even though my young men now, my boys are older, doesn't mean I can't still have an influence. And one of my influences is to step back. That's a good influence. That's a good, our father did that quite often. He told us something quite often. If we had a problem, a struggle, he would say, try to figure that. I think you could figure this one out. And I don't think kids are given that chance to figure things out. And and when we do, gosh, when we have a problem and we have to face it, not thinking that we can never go to our parent if it's really crazy, right? But if it's a problem that we can figure out, why not? And I think we need to do that more. And I know that I'm guilty of that. And even though I was parented differently, which is strange, when we're parented this way and then we have children and we parent differently, I don't get it. I think sometimes we look at our childhoods and we go, oh, it's tough, but no, there's a lot of good things in our childhood that we need to bring back and to and go ahead and do share with our kids. So no, I there was so much to this book that I really appreciated. Even the whole idea of its polarizing culture regarding the left and the right, and that it just has gone, it's increased over these years. It's like us against them, and we can't find these middle grounds, and it's so healthy when we do that. So we could talk to one another to be able to debate. Oh, you're because you say this. Oh, I'm hurt. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to. I've heard that from people, adults saying I don't want to talk to that person anymore because they believe in this. I go, wow, you can't have a difference of opinion. You can't have a debate on this topic. And I think the sad part, Ruben, is we're seeing more and more of that every day with young people. So yeah,
Yes. There's a couple of things you mentioned divisions and the two sides. He pointed out, and now this could be up for debate. I thought it was a good point, and it might have contributed to these problems. And that is that when Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House, he kind of created a dividing line between his party and the Democrats. And whereas before they can disagree, but hash it out and go out for lunch or something, um, no, we're going to be with our side and you're going to be with your side. And it created a lot of friction. And ever since then, now it's a really interesting analysis I never thought of before. And it makes sense. He was kind of a divisive figure, Newt
yeah,
Gingrich. I'm not commenting on his politics, but I'm just saying it rang true to me. The other thing that was really interesting and I never thought about is Haidt mentions that part of the problem within the universities is that, of course, the customer is always right. And the idea that they're paying really for a luxury item with these crazy tuition fees. So we're going to give them what they want. They want a safe room with coloring books and not hear the speaker. Let's give them what they want. But I think they're reaping the whirlwind now. Chasing professors out of their jobs and presidents out. This
yeah.
is problematic. So
Yeah, I think that we, the universities when I was going to school were starting to go that direction, but I think they've gone so far to the point where they're letting the kids kind of run the show, run the program, and they're even allowing them to change some of the rules of the school to even limit debate and limit your First Amendment right to speak, right? And so I think that that's a big problem. I mean, I think we have to be real careful when we send our kids to school as well, do some homework on where we're sending them, because the reality is, yes, we have a lot of influence on the parenting. However, in school, they're going to have a big influence there with their professors and so forth. So I think we just, that just seems to be standard to understand where you're sending your child, but at the same time, instilling in them that, hey, you know what, words hurt, but you're going to live. Remember the whole sticks and stones. He brings that up. We hear that when we were kids, but now it's like, oh no, no, words hurt, and and yes, they hurt, but they do so much damage. Like if someone's throwing a stone at you, it's the same thing, and it's not. They're two different things. Getting physically abused and getting verbally abused are two different things. Yeah, none of them are great, but there's different consequences, different thoughts to it. So yeah.
Do want to point out that he has some suggestions on how to create or how to improve, support students to becoming, he used the words wise. And I like that word, right? It is tough, but it's making them tougher. But really, you're just wiser too. You're able to handle the world um, with wisdom. So he mentions sending your children to an overnight summer camp in the woods for a few weeks without devices. And again, we don't want to. Some people don't want to get rid of their send their kids away, but this idea of being self-sufficient. Talk about anti-fragile. Think about the people. You know, this might get a little too off topic, but it kind of isn't. There's there's a sub there's been a subreddit and like a Twitter discussion on what a civil war would be like. Because there was a movie about civil war recently, and people were saying this is not what the next civil war would be like. If we had a civil war today, it would be very, very bloody, and it would be. I didn't realize that these people, these I love these experts on Twitter who understand their world or their sense of um, where they work and their career, but some truckers and people who understand export imports and ports and things like that were saying that, and I never thought about this. Did you realize how easy a city can fall apart within a couple of days? You know that
Sure.
when you go to Ralph's or Vaughn's, there's not that much food in there to feed that section of the city, and we depend entirely on truckers who come in and then leave, come in again and leave. But if that's cut off, you and I are in big trouble. But the
Right.
people, right?
Yeah.
But who can survive the best and the longest? The tough, anti-fragile people who know how to hunt,
Hmm.
fish, build the cabin or find a cabin, pitch a tent. That's tough. And we're going back to this. Send your children to an overnight summer camp in the woods. Teach them how to build a fire because talk about building wisdom and toughness, right?
Oh yeah. I've been wanting to, I've watched this whole series called Alone on TV, and I bought a couple books on how to really live out in the wilderness. Not that I'm that kind of guy, but I'm not lying to you. I've been talking to my son Orion, said we need to go back camping because he was a Boy Scout, but we need to relearn some things and we need to practice some things because just to learn that grit. And it does so much for young people when they're out there camping and hiking and learning about plants and learning about things they could eat and can't eat. And because, geez, I mean,
Because
if there is going to be civil war,
if there
uh,
was a disaster, basically the idea in some of these chatters is that there are people who would cut off. There's so much division in this country, and we've talked about this, who would cut off supplies into the cities. There's some thoughts about that we're so dependent on these supplies. Well, there are people who are in control of the grid. It's kind of scary to think about, but you're right. But this idea of connecting with nature and knowing how to live out there. Who am I to say all this? I'm with you.
yeah.
I would need I need help on that too. The last thing I want to mention in his suggestion is to encourage your children to engage in a lot of productive disagreement. The idea that disagreeing with somebody is okay. It's not personal, and you can hear the other side. But we know of many, many children who are just listening to one thing. Is it helpful? No. So
As a teacher, that's what we could even help with, doing argument debate in class and promote. I do one debate a year, but man, it makes me want to do more of that. Let the kids be able to explain and argue their side, and then let the other side listen, learn how to listen. That's a big part of it, listening to the other side, and then giving your piece. Because kids don't do that today. They're like, "Oh, my feelings are hurt," and I've actually been reported to some other teachers like saying, "Oh, he said something insensitive." I said, "What did I say?" And they said, "I'm like, okay." It talks about how a lot of professors and teachers are now having to walk on eggshells because it's like you're not sure if you're going to hurt someone's feelings. And that has to be, we could do as teachers, we could work on that. promoting argument, debate, promoting speech, and of course, parents could do that as well.
Very good. Any last words on the coddling of the American mind?
I guess the only thing I would say is read the get a copy of it. I think you'll enjoy it. There's different parts of the book. Of course, it talks about the college situation, about parenting, and then of course the great part at the end is what can we do to better our society to move forward. And I think this is a good step. And I just felt like the gentlemen were. I didn't agree on every single thing, but you don't expect to. But at least you could say, hey, I see what he's saying or they're saying, and I agree with a lot of it, and I want to put forward in my life and change. And I already have made some changes in my life just by reading this book. I like a book, Ruben, when I could make some changes in my life, and this is one of those books. So I would encourage the viewer and listener to get a copy.
Very good. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching, everybody. We really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.
Bye bye.